June 25th, 1876. Custer believed he was riding into an easy victory. What he didn't know, what doomed nearly 75% of his men from the first shot, was that he faced almost 3 times the expected enemy strength. 5 companies cut off on barren ridges, surrounded by thousands of warriors. The split-second decision to divide his 210-man force would trap them in a web that no cavalry charge could break. This isn't just a story of arrogance or bad luck. It's a study in how fatally wrong the numbers, the intelligence, and the plan were from the start. So what invisible force sealed their fate before their rifles ever jammed? A vision came to Sitting Bull in the days before battle. A field covered in grasshoppers, falling helpless into a Lakota camp. For him and the thousands gathered along the Little Bighorn, this was no idle dream. It was a sign, as binding as any order. Warriors painted their faces with the confidence of prophecy, certain that the spirits had already chosen the victors. The camp itself was a living nation. Families, elders, children, and fighters from nearly every Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho band. Sundance, scars still fresh, they carried the weight of old treaties broken and buffalo herds vanishing. But now, on the eve of the American centennial, the power had shifted. The date, June 25th, 1876, meant little to the people on the greasy grass, but everything to the men riding under Custer's flag. For the US Army, the moment was supposed to be a show of force, a quick blow before the 4th of July. Instead, the 7th Cavalry rode into a gathering that outnumbered them 2 or 3 to 1, their enemies united not just by leaders, but by a sense that fate itself was on their side. The psychological edge belonged to the defenders long before the first rifle cracked. Custer's men marched in with the sun at their backs, blind to the storm that prophecy, and sheer numbers, had already set in motion. Custer rode with numbers in his head that belonged to last winter's reports, not the living camp before him. Army scouts, Indian agents, and even the Bureau of Indian Affairs had all settled on a figure, about 800 warriors. That estimate was repeated in dispatches, scribbled into orders, and accepted as gospel in the field. But the truth, hidden in the bends of the Little Bighorn and masked by the sweep of the village, was far more dangerous. Archaeology and native testimony now agree. Nearly 2,000 fighters stood ready, drawn from every band and every grievance. Custer never saw them all. He trusted that if he struck fast, the enemy would scatter. Instead, he split his regiment into 3. Reno was sent down the valley to attack the southern end of the camp. Benteen was ordered to swing out to the left, searching for stray bands and blocking any escape. Custer himself took 5 companies, just over 200 men, on a long arc toward the northern tip of the village. This was not a unified blow, it was a gamble, dividing strength in the face of an enemy whose real numbers were guessed, not known. Orders were hurried, given by word of mouth, with couriers sent racing between columns. Each group moved out believing they could handle what waited ahead. The split left every battalion alone, unable to support the others once the shooting started. What began as a calculated strike became, in minutes, a series of isolated fights, each group surrounded, each cut off from help. The fatal arithmetic was set. The 7th Cavalry would face the largest native force ever assembled on the plains, not as one, but as fragments. The first shots echoed across tangled grass and broken earth, but the real battle was fought in the space between rifle cracks. Custer's men carried the Springfield Model 1873, a sturdy, single-shot carbine that could hit at distance, but only if you had time to reload. 8 rounds a minute if you kept your nerve and your hands steady. Against them, Lakota and Cheyenne warriors fired Winchesters and Spencers, repeating rifles that spat out 15, even 20 shots in the same span. Every second counted. In the chaos of close quarters, the volume of fire from the native side doubled, sometimes tripled what the soldiers could return. The myth of the jammed Springfield lingers, but archaeology tells a different story. Just 3% of recovered cartridges show pry marks. The real problem wasn't malfunction, it was speed and numbers. Crazy Horse knew the ground as well as he knew his own hands. He led warriors through coulees and behind ridges, always moving, always closing the circle. The land favored those who could disappear and reappear at will. Cavalry lines stretched thin on bare hills, found themselves flanked and pinned before they could even form a defense. Brave Bear remembered the moment the tide turned. We shot fast and moved faster, their bullets whistled overhead, but ours found men and horses. The terrain that looked open from a distance became a trap up close. Ravines swallowed cavalrymen. Tall grass hid entire bands until it was too late. The 7th's firepower was outmatched, their positions exposed, and every minute on the field tipped the scales further. The edge belonged to those who could shoot, move, and vanish. Again and again, until the circle was complete. The circle closed with a speed that left no room for hope. Warriors surged from the grass and coulees, their gunfire converging from every angle. Custer's 5 companies, scattered across the ridgeline, tried to form a defense, but the volume of fire was relentless. Archaeologists later mapped thousands of cartridge cases in tight clusters, evidence of men firing until the very last moment, their lines shrinking with each volley. It took less than an hour for the field to empty of resistance. 42% of the regiment's companies vanished on that slope, the highest single-action loss the US Army had seen in the Plains Wars. Ironhawk remembered the chaos. The soldiers fell like buffalo before the hunt. We rode around them, firing from all sides. There was nowhere to run. Some tried to break out, only to be cut down in the open. Others, like those on Calhoun Hill, huddled together, firing until they were overrun. Private Windolf, who survived on Reno Hill, later described what was left behind. Bodies stripped, mutilated, sometimes unrecognizable. The horror was not just in the numbers, but in the suddenness. An entire command wiped out before help could even find the smoke. The collapse was total. The last shots faded, leaving only the sound of horses, the cries of the victors, and the wind moving through the grass. For the 7th Cavalry, there would be no rally, no rescue, only silence and the memory of a defeat that was over almost as soon as it began. News of the disaster traveled faster than any courier on the plains. By July 6, headlines in New York and Chicago screamed of massacre. Custer and his command wiped out, 268 dead, dozens more wounded. The shock collided with the country's centennial celebrations, turning pride into grief overnight. Families scoured casualty lists, desperate for names. Some found only errors or missing lines. Army leadership moved quickly to shape the story. Official reports spoke of overwhelming numbers and heroic resistance, glossing over confusion, division, and the speed of the collapse. The dead were praised, the decisions less so. In the press, rumors swirled. Had the army hidden the truth? Editors complained of slow updates and incomplete lists, but the real delay was distance, not design. Still, the narrative that reached the public was one of misfortune, not miscalculation, a story easier to bear than the facts on the ground. 3 years after the shooting stopped, the army put its own actions on trial. The Reno Inquiry of 1879 combed through every order, every retreat, every desperate message. The verdict was careful. Reno had acted with prudence, not cowardice, when he pulled back to the bluffs. No one would be blamed for the disaster, at least not officially. But the lesson was harder to bury. Never divide your command in the presence of an enemy you do not fully understand. Modern tacticians still point to this field as proof. Intelligence, surveillance, and communication are not luxuries. They are survival. Libby Custer spent decades fighting to rescue her husband's reputation, while Comanche, the battered cavalry horse, became a living symbol of the price paid for hubris and poor information. The warning endures. In war, what you don't know will kill you. On June 25, 1876, 5 companies of the 7th Cavalry, about 210 men, were annihilated in less than an hour, contributing to a total loss of 268 soldiers. The evidence is clear: faulty intelligence, a 2.5 to 1 enemy mismatch, and the fatal decision to split the regiment left Custer's men overextended and surrounded. Archaeological mapping confirms rapid collapse under converging fire, while the Reno Court of Inquiry's transcripts document the breakdown in command and communication. Yet even today, the exact sequence of Custer's final moments remains partly unknown, as survivor testimonies and native accounts diverge on key details. The defeat shocked a nation and forced a lasting re-evaluation of military doctrine. The lesson endures: underestimating your opponent and dividing your forces without reliable intelligence can be fatal. That reality, written in official reports and on the ground at Little Bighorn, remains unchallenged by time.